Hi and welcome to the part 4 of our EPA series for the level 5 leader in adult care apprenticeship. Today we're going to cover communication. So that's part of a standard that you will have to demonstrate your knowledge on communication. So there are three main criteria there. So you've got KA, which is legal and ethical frameworks in relation to confidentiality and sharing information. K9, a range of tools and strategies to enhance communication, including technology. S9, develop and implement organizational processes to ensure that records and reports are written clearly and concisely, and to keep information safe and preserve confidentiality. We also got behavior 4, which is communication. So good communication is central to successful caring relationships and effective team working. With that before criterion, you're probably gonna get it covered throughout the discussion, so you might not be asked specific questions on that area. However, we're gonna cover that in this video just to give you some additional knowledge that you can incorporate when you refer to the communication within different questions that you might be asked. You will notice that we've got here a mixture. So we've got 2K, which are the knowledge criteria. You've got 1S, which is the skill criteria, and the B is the behavior. So that behavior and skills criteria will need to be covered through the example. So how you do certain things. So let's have a look at them a little bit in a little bit more detail. So again, to achieve distinction, that difference here is between explain and analyze. So if you're gonna just identify various frameworks, so we've got here frameworks relating to confidentiality and information sharing. Then if you explain them, which you tell the assessor what they are, that's gonna give you a pass. You should extend that actually to processes that legislation guides, those frameworks guide. If you're gonna go beyond that explanation and description, and you're gonna attempt to analyze, then that's gonna give you distinction. So to achieve distinction within that area, you have to analyze how legal and ethical frameworks have been applied and further evaluate the effectiveness. So again, once you've identified what they are, how you implement them, then you need to think about, how effectively they are implemented. What are the blocks within your organization? Maybe what you have changed to remove those blocks, those barriers, or what you are proposing to change. Or generally, some legislation, they may not agree fully with the way your organization is run, so you need to take different approach to embed them within your organization. Or like some aspects of the communication going to be more challenging in a domiciliary care than in a care home because of the nature of the jobs and how the things are set up. So if you think how you communicate with your staff, you're going to use more technology and different systems to keep your staff informed within the domiciliary home care type services. So here you've got a little pointer at the bottom, something to think about when you answer that question. So judge how effectively these frameworks, which we're going to look at in a second, are applied in your organization, the strengths, the limitations, and support this with a real example. So again, with the communication within that area, a lot of you probably had an experience of introducing digital record system to your organization. So again, embedding those systems could have brought some issues around the GDPR, how you're going to manage that aspect. So again, you've got some good examples there to share, and how it also improved your communication. So when we look at the legislation you have to mention. So we've got here Data Protection Act 2018, which is going to be your key legislation for that area, GDPR 2018, Human Rights Act 1998, and CARE Act 2014. So that's the legislation that mentions the privacy, the right to the privacy, confidentiality element, explains your expectation within that area. So if you are able to identify that legislation, say how it impacts your role, then that's gonna give you that pass. If we look here on this side, judge how effectively these frameworks are applied in your organization. So how have you embedded that data protection or GDPR for what sort of systems, processes? You could mention here systems for reporting breaches to within the communication with the confidentiality, so data breaches, that was the word I was looking for. Again, maybe around the digital systems, the training for your staff, how is that working in practice? Again, looking at the limitations and strengths of those systems and how those legislation are embedded within them. There will be element of consent as well, which GDPR legislation is going to support, because you're going to have your privacy notices there. So for your staff, giving you permission to hold data about them, but also for the individual, the amount of sensitive information you're holding for those individuals is massive. And if you think, relate that to yourself, would you like a stranger to know that much very personal detail about you? So that kind of puts things into perspective. So again, how do you manage that data, that respect element, which is also a person-centered approach value. So just to summarize, so describe how you apply those when recording and storing information, so how that legislation guides that, give example of a process you follow to keep information safe. So again, talking about your systems, how does it work in your organization, explain how you decide what can be shared with whom and why. Maybe also how you communicate that to your staff. How do you make sure that they know how to share, record, how to store information? I'm kind of going to take you a little bit towards that distinction element. Within the distinction, again, like I said to you already, identify strengths and gaps or limitations in current practice. Maybe you are already aware of something that's not working as you would like it to work, and you may be planning to make some improvements in that area. Consider how another approach might handle it differently. Maybe when you were introducing digital record system, maybe you reviewed different systems, and that can allow you to talk about why you have chosen the current one. Support your evaluation with specific real examples. So it's very important that on your EPA you don't only talk about the examples without explaining the theory behind that example, or just covering theory without example. You have to marry those two together. So that's very important. And just a reminder, do use I statements. The assessor is not interested in how your organization work. They're not carrying out an inspection on your organization. They're interested in you and your knowledge on that specific area. Okay, let's move on. So here you've got that legislation outlined. I would just suggest that maybe you research each of them and make a note to yourself for your revision notes, so you have a better understanding of how that legislation relates to you in respect of your role. Because again, even though there's lots of you completing the same qualification, you work in different settings. Some of you might be deputies, some of you might be registered managers, some of you might be the organization owners or business owners or directors. So again, think about how it relates to your role, and then that will bring those I statements and will be more natural to you. So like I said, Data Protection Act 2018 and GDPR 2018. Very important legislation. So privacy notices there, the confidentiality element, sharing information on the need to know basis, having the correct information in place as well. The Human Rights Act, so this is the right to the privacy. So that's kind of not directly. So how do you promote that right? How do you protect individuals' rights to privacy? And on that ethical element, you're going to have, actually, there are some situations where we can't guarantee we can keep the information secure and confidential. So what are those situations? So you look at the individual safety element. So if individuals placing themselves at risk, or the actions put other people at risk, then you can breach the confidentiality. So that's usually something around the safeguarding. That's the situation where you would breach that confidentiality. Also making sure that you don't make promises that you can't keep. We shouldn't be making any promises in care other than the promise to deliver the care in line with a care plan. The Care Act 2014, again, the direct link to communication is that confidentiality element, and again promoting that privacy and handling that sensitive data with respect. There's a new legislation that it's not very often discussed in the session, but might be something worth looking into, even from the perspective of upskilling yourself in that area. So we've got the Data Use and Access Act 2025. So that kind of ties in with the GDPR. So it updates data protection law, including data sharing and subject access request. So again, I would encourage you to read a little bit more about that. And then you got skills for care, code of conduct. The communication is element of that. We could think about CQC, fundamental standards, and then you've got that consent standard and those regulations relating to it as well. So thinking about how you obtain consent from the ethical perspective here is also what do you do in the situations when the individuals are lacking capacity. So that's kind of in terms of the legislation. Those are your frameworks, that when you are asked about frameworks that relate to communication, this is what you need to talk about. And then how you present that information, if you're going to explain and describe, going to give you a pass. If you're going to go beyond that, so analyze, talk about the limitations, difficulties, challenges, the strengths, how those frameworks guide your practice, what's the best practice, that's going to give you distinction. So that's K8. Sometimes on a level 5, maybe not so often, you might not be asked direct questions about principles of confidentiality or principles of communication, but might be worth kind of familiarizing yourself with the 8 Caldicott principles and bringing that into a conversation. That also shows your competence, because you know quite a lot. Or you know a lot of information. You've got to know the frameworks, you've got different guidelines, like even we can look at the 8 Caldicott principles, that's guidelines for practices around communication and confidentiality. So this is a national framework for handling confidential information, health and social care. So in the nutshell, so the information you store about the individual, so very similar to the GDPR. If you remember when it was introduced, we had those 12 steps we had to consider when we're changing the our paperwork and our approach, just to tighten up our processes. So information you store, you need to have the need for that information. So if you don't need that piece of information to, support that individual, to manage your staff, you shouldn't know that. You shouldn't store that information. Of course, that's going to be also guided by your retention policy. So that's again something in terms of looking more into internal processes. The all information that you store about the individual, so generally information you store, need to be correct and comply with law. Again, you need to have systems like, how are you going to actually be checking that the information you store about people is correct? So about your individuals, you probably got your regular reviews, but I remember from my practice, the issue was around the information we store about our staff. So how do we know when the circumstances have changed? How do we know that the address have changed, or maybe the bank details have changed, or something like that, maybe the next of kin? Because yes, it should be on the staff, they should come and inform us, but not everybody does. So what have we all put in place to make sure that you've got those checks? So we used to do that alongside the supervision, just checking if we had the correct information about our team. Another part of another Caldicott principle is use confidential information only when it's necessary. So again, that definition of the confidentiality, sharing information on the need-to-know basis. Use the minimum necessary information, seek consent from the individual. So having those systems, in place to restrict the access to the information. Everybody needs to have a kind of good understanding of the information, fulfill duty, of care, kind of in terms of protecting that information. And that consent is about informing people how the confidential information is used and seeking the consent if we are going to share the information. So again, here going back to that element where if the individual is lacking capacity, then you've got that ethical dilemma there, and that you need to consider how you're going to do that. So again, you may have a specific example you can share on that. And again, that's what's going to bring you closer to the distinction. Confidentiality and information sharing. So just to summarize that one. So protect, share safely, and record. So protect, so keep information confidential when it is personal or sensitive. Again, if you read a little bit more about it, there are certain kind of rules about that information, what makes it sensitive, what makes it personal. So that's that data that allows us to identify that this is that specific person's, like the date of birth, the name, things like that. There's no lawful reason to share. So again, then we have to keep that information, safe. The person has not agreed, and there is no overriding duty. So let's say person doesn't agree for you to share the information with the family members, and actually there's no legal responsibility for you to share it with them. Sharing would be excessive or unnecessary, and the recipient does need to know that. So again, sharing it on the need to know basis. All of that comes from that definition of confidentiality. Sharing it safely. So person's consent, support safe, effective care. There's a safeguarding consent. That's why we maybe would need to breach that confidentiality element, and there is a legal requirement for us to share that information. Also, the emergency situations. Think about, when you call for an ambulance, you pass very, sensitive data to emergency services, but this is in order for that individual to get the care that they need. So that's what we should also think about how you share it, what sort of system you use. So how do you make sure that information that you share is passed in a safe way? So do you use secure systems? Do you password protect? How do you do that? And think about, your protection, because each organization that stores data needs to have strong systems in place to show that, yes, this is what we have in place to protect that information. So that's guided by the ICO as well. So again, ICO is maybe another element that you may want to research here. Records. So always record. So in care we know if it's not written, it hasn't happened. So, and again, when it comes to sharing, so what was shared, who was it shared with, why it was shared, the legal or policy basis, and actions agreed or follow-up needed. So that's in terms of confidentiality and information sharing. Going back to that analyzing legal and ethical framework, so you've got this kind of a pathway you can follow when you moving from explanation to evaluation for distinction. So you apply. So how did you apply confidentiality? So GDPR, consent, how do you, embed Data Protection Act, Data Access and Use Act, maybe, or Human Rights Act, or safeguarding rules in practice. Then evidence. So this is what records, audits, incidents, complaints, or feedback show whether it worked. So how do you know it worked? Then the impact. So impact is about, impact on the individual, on the organization, maybe on you, on the wider, maybe community, depending on what you're talking about. So did it protect privacy, improve safety, support continuity of care, or improve trust? And improve. So what would you change? So that's kind of almost like a reflective practice process. Training, templates, audits, handover, privacy notices, or technology. And here you've got at the bottom of this slide, it shows you that distinction language. So this was effective because the limitation was the evidence shown. So you've got some additional information that you can use within your professional discussion. On K9, so tools, strategies to enhance communication. So you've got range of tools and strategies to enhance communication, including technology. So again, for a pass, you're going to talk about range of communication, enhancing tools and strategies. So you'll probably identify what tools do you use to communicate, what strategies you've got in place, how do you do that, what technology do you use. And then to gain distinction, you appraise them. So again, what works well with those systems, what doesn't work. Maybe you're going to have a specific example. So you judge which strategy is most effective across the organization, its strengths and limitations, and supported this with a real example. I'm sure you're going to have some examples of how you communicate with different people, what tool you use, how that tool is working, what's not so good about it, what are its limitations, what maybe you have changed around that. So for example, using a WhatsApp group with your staff team. So maybe originally when you started using it, you've you had a channel for everybody and people were responding to you and to each other, and then there was chaos. So then maybe you've created a channel where you can just push information to staff so they can read it and acknowledge, but maybe they are not allowed to respond. And then maybe you go created smaller channels for staff supporting particular individuals. Again, different practices there. You could say, why you use the WhatsApp, let's encrypted and protected information sharing system in a way. So that's the tools that you can mention. So what to include in your answer? So name specific tools, technologies you use. So you can have different care planning software. I'm sure you use one, like as I mentioned already, WhatsApp, maybe phones, maybe different devices, assistive technology. The communication, sometimes we forget that even a pull cord in somebody's bedroom is a way of a communication, because that's allowing individuals to call for the assistance. So think about tools like that, different alarm bells, the watches, some that will alert you that individual needs help, maybe specific apps the individuals are using. So there's probably a lot that you can talk about, but also, the tools, it could be, if you use pictures, different kinds, different types of, like in terms of methods of communication. You can talk about the active listening here. You can talk about your body language, its impact on that, and what sort of other tools you use to reinforce that and to support the flow of the information and its effectiveness. So describe which tool you use for which situation and why. Explain how this tool support the people you work with. Give an example of using a specific communication strategy in practice. And then again, to push yourself towards that distinction, you have to judge how effective the strategies are. So you talk about the strategy, so the tool, you describe that tool, explain, in what situations you use it, why you use it, and then limitations, the strengths, what worked, what hasn't worked, specific examples, identify, so strengths and limitations I already told you, and then consider whether a different tool or strategy could work better, and maybe you've used the one tool and then actually it didn't work and you've changed it to something else. Support your judgment with a specific example of impact or improvement. So it's again, impact on the organization, on the individual, on yourself, on your practice, on the effectiveness. So that's again what to include in your answer. Communication tools and strategies. So that's kind of in detail. You have to focus here. So let's expand. So the method should match the person, the purpose, and the risk level. So verbal communication. So it's going to be things like face-to-face conversations, telephone calls, video calls, meetings, and handovers. Non-verbal communication. So body language, eye contact, tone, facial expression, gestures, sign language, and picture formats. Written communication. You're going to have loads of those. care notes, emails, letters, memos, care plans, reports, referrals, electronic messages, accessible formats. So how do you make information accessible to those individuals? A good example could be here, complaint process that you share with the individuals, but here we've also got communication passports, or something that kind of would allow you to get to know that individual better from that perspective of the communication. So easy reads, large prints, translations, interpretations, symbols, communication. You can think about professionals who support you with that, like OT can help you. No, sorry, not OT, speech, well, OT as well, if some aspects from that physical more than anything else, but speech and language therapists, how they can work with you. Technology, so electronic records, secure messaging, video calls, apps, alerts, and digital audit systems. And then professional communication, so you're going to have your referrals, MTT meetings, information sharing, safeguarding, reporting, and family communication. Because you have to also think about the communication. You've got the aspect of how I communicate, who I communicate with. So professional, well, it's always on professional level, but what I mean here is like your staff team, different professionals, family members, and individuals. And then there's that aspect of communication, which is probably greater in your role, is that how we communicate with the individuals to make sure that they get the support that they need from you, that communication need is met, and how do you make sure your staff understand that? So maybe even training, what training there is in place for that. And then when you communicate, think about how you make your communication effective. So here you've got the 7 C's of effective communication. So your communication needs to be clear, so easy to understand with no ambiguity, concise, says what's needed without unnecessary detail. So I always say it's a kind of to the point, concrete, specific, and backed by facts, not vague, because we know everything in care needs to be factual. There's no space for opinions. Correct, accurate, error-free, appropriate for the audience. Coherent, logical, connected, and consistent in tone. Complete, includes everything the receiver needs to know, and courteous, respectful, friendly, and considerate in tone. You could also bring here, I didn't put that on the slides, but some theories of communication. You will remember you have completed an assessment when you look at different theories, like a transactional analysis or linear way of communication. So you got that one way of communication when you give staff instructions on how to do something, or you're going to have interactive communication, so kind of back and forth. So all of that. I'm thinking about one more, but I can't recall the name of it. But also you can think about the solar model of communication, active listening, Argal communication cycle. So they all kind of help you to be more conscious when you communicate, to be more effective in that communication, and feedback element of the communication. So how do you seek feedback? Because that actually tells you that the audience who receives your message, that they actually got the right message, that kind of whole communication cycle. So the basic one starts with the sender, we've got the message traveling to the receiver, and they give you feedback. That's kind of that basic communication cycle. Accessible and person-centered communication, that's another aspect you can mention or bring into the conversation. So selecting the right tool for the individual and situation. So how do you do that? So kind of about that personalizing the communication. So individuals, so they preferred method of communication, maybe they got some sensory needs, language, cognition, maybe specific condition or diagnosis, like, with the dementia or learning disability, or with autism. We know, again, I know, like, it's depending on the level and how advanced those conditions are, but you're going to be kind of considering that from that person-centered perspective. Capacity, the culture, knowing that sometimes different words, different gestures can mean different things in different cultures. Emotions and environment as well. Purpose, so is the aim to inform, involve, reassure, gain, consent, report, concern, handover, or escalate. Then risk, and does the information relate to medication, safeguarding, health change, confidentiality, or urgent safety? Method, so we're going to choose what's going to be the most effective method for our communication. So choose face-to-face, written, electronic, visual, interpreter, advocate, that accessible format of information, and then check, confirm the understanding. So that's almost like that communication is like to kind of reflect the Argal communication cycle. So appraising communication strategy. So kind of what you should include in that aspect. So appraise communication by looking at consistency, accessibility, safety, staff confidence, and outcomes. So audit records, so check accuracy, timeliness, clarity, missing confirmation, and confidentiality. Review handovers, meetings, interactions, professional calls, and person-centered communication. Gather feedback, so use individuals, families, staff, professionals' complaints and compliments to identify issues. Not only gather the feedback, but act on it. Review incidents. Look for communication-related themes in safeguarding, medication, false complaints, or missed care, because maybe that was due to miscommunication. Support staff, so use induction, training, supervision, coaching, mentoring, competency checks, and improve systems, update templates, handover tools, technology, accessible formats, and escalation pathways. So all of that can be included in your answer. Then we've got that S line, that's very specific, more of like a present in your competency in that area. So develop and implement organizational processes to ensure that the records and reports are written clearly and concisely, and to keep information safe and preserve confidentiality. So to pass, you have to explain organizational processes, have they been developed or how they've been developed, implemented in relation to recording, reporting, and confidentiality. So basically what you're talking is about what system have you got in communication, how do you use them, maybe how you train your staff. But then actually, I think specifically with that here, you're going to have lots of examples and you will be able to analyze. So, how effective are those processes, those systems, what's working, what's not working, what you would change. So that will give you that element of distinction. So what you need to include. So for pass, describe those specific processes for recording and reporting and communicating. So sharing, explain how these processes keep information safe and confidential. Give an example of following these processes in practice. Explain how the process ensures records are clear and concise. And for distinction, judge how effective these processes are at achieving the purpose. So again, and then strengths and limitations, that kind of will help you to actually judge how effective they are. Are they actually working? Are they, in line with the purpose? Why they are there? Describe improvements you identified and implemented, or may want to implement. Maybe you are in a process of reviewing it. Again, if you are introducing digital record system, maybe there was a pilot. But again, remember I statements. What did you do? Support your evaluation with evidence of the impact of the improvements, so on the organization, individual, maybe yourself, the efficiency. Recording, reporting, confidentiality, that's in detail. So what we need to hear cover. So good records protect people, support continuity of care, and provide accountability. So starting to repeat ourselves a little bit. So policies and procedures, again, remember the law is no, the other way. So the policies and procedures are the translation of the law. So you, through the policies and procedures, you tell people how you are meeting that law requirement, that compliance element. So your policies and procedures are local expectations for records, because there might be some specific expectations from your local authority. So they may require you, there may be requirement for you to share information only through the secure systems, for example. And that's the only way they share the information with you. Reports, data protection, confidentiality, information sharing under the policies and procedures. Then templates and systems, so care notes, smart charts, incident forms, handover tools, audits, referrals, electronic care records, you name it. Clear standards, so factual, timely, accurate, person-centered, legible, concise, and free from judgment and language. So this is kind of, how we compile the record, or principles of proper record. Access control, so passwords, role-based access, secure storage, locked cabinets, and confidentiality expectations. Training and supervision, so you're going to have here induction, updates, observation, feedback, competency checks and supervisions, discussions, and monitoring and improvement. So again, audits, spot checks, incident reviews, action plans, and learning shared with staff. It's very likely that by the time you get to that point, you probably have covered everything. If you've answered those first two properly with examples of everything, you probably covered the systems as well. Safe record cycle, so maybe that's kind of important to remember. So only collect information needed for care, support, safety, or legal requirements. So only what we need to have. Records, so write factually, timely, clear, and concise notes using agreed systems. Store, keep paper and digital records secure, restrict access to authorized staff. For share lawfully, proportionately, and securely with those who need to know. Review, audit quality, learn from errors, and improve systems or staff practice. So that actually, within that improvements element, it allows you to bring that term evidence-based practice as well here. So that is important to consider as well. And remember, weak records can create safeguarding, medication, continuity, and regulatory risks, and you don't want that. Communication behaviors, like I said, you are very likely, at that point you have covered that already. So to pass, demonstrate how they manage communication between staff and users of services. So if you use those examples, you've already covered that. You've got the pass. And then if you would analyze communication system on a regular basis to demonstrate improvements, again, you would have done that already. So what to include? So just going to quickly go through this one. Describe how you communicate with your colleagues day to day. So think about, those examples you're using. So it's about, how you present that information more than anything else. Describe how you communicate with the people you support. Give an example of managing communication in a specific situation. Explain how you check understanding and adjust your approach. And then distinctions, so judge which communication systems work best in your organization. identify its strengths and limitations, consider whether another approach could work better, and support this with a real example of an improvement you have made. And then managing communication in practice. So key message for before is about how you manage communication between staff and with people using services. So staff to staff, you're going to have handover, team meetings, supervisions, briefings, escalations, debriefs, and shared records. Staff to individuals, so preferred communication methods, consent, involvement, dignity, compassion, and checking understanding. On a consent, I haven't mentioned those that, like things like informed consent. How are we going to gain consent for somebody who doesn't have capacity, or maybe we struggle to gain that consent. Staff, families, or advocates, that's on that line. So appropriate information sharing, consent, again, boundaries, involvement, and concerns. Staff professionals, so referrals, MDT meetings, safeguarding, GP community teams, commissioner CQC, evidence, maybe reviews, manager and team. So expectations, training, feedback, modeling good communication, addressing poor practice, organization and learning, or organization on the line with learning, use patterns from complaints, incidents, audits, and feedback to improve communication systems. Also think about the language you are using. How do you make sure that your staff are using proper language, so they don't use the words that maybe don't, sometimes stuff talking away kind of in a simple form, but sometimes it take away dignity from the individual in the way they're presenting the information. So we need to be mindful that when we're describing what happened, what we did, how we supported the individual, it's the person there. So that's something maybe worth mentioning here as well. So give example of how you manage communication, not only how you personally communicate, so how you manage communication. Bear that in mind, very important. Analyzing communication systems. So analyze systems regularly and show what improved because of your actions. So again, about you, what have you done to improve communication? So problem identified. So example, repeated missed information during handover or unclear care notes. Evidence gathered. So all these incident reports, complaints, staff feedback, family feedback, or observations. Again, lessons learned, evidence-based practice. Action taken. So change template, gave training, coach staff, clarified expectation, or introduced checks. Impact measured. So fewer errors, clear records, better continuity, improved staff confidence or safe care. Further improvement, review again, adapt approach, update policy, or share learning in team meetings. So distinction language here, I analyzed, the data showed, this improved, next I would probably note those, because it's kind of nice to create like a bank of the statements you want to use during the conversation, during the professional discussion. How to answer communication questions. So again, this is what we've covered. So knowledge element, name the legislation, policy, framework, tool, or practice. Explain what you did using I statements. Very important, what you did. Impact, describe the outcome for the individual, staff, organization, or safety. Effectiveness, I always kind of add that effectiveness element because I feel it's quite important here. Analysis, so evaluate effectiveness, limitations, and what could be improved. So for level 5, answers should show leadership, system thinking, and evaluation. So, when you talk about the improvements, what you've proposed, maybe what you've done, what you have changed, that's your leadership element there as well. So again, it's probably easier than it looks when you look at leadership. I have to present that. You're probably doing it. It's just kind of being aware of it. Example of communication questions. They are very simple, but I think what I would more focus on those questions than those questions is looking at those criteria, because the criteria, this is what the assessor would look to add to change it into a question. But again, whilst you're practicing, you could use them, to check your knowledge. Are you able to answer those questions? And then if you are, then again, that helps you kind of with your revision. So how have you used legal and ethical frameworks relating to confidentiality information sharing? When may confidentiality need to be broken? And how would you record and justify this? What tools and strategies do you use to enhance communication across your service? How do you support staff to use the correct communication method for individuals? How do you develop and implement processes for clear records and reports? How do you analyze communication systems and use findings to improve practice? So to answer each question using knowledge, example, outcome, analysis. And here to wrap up, we've got some terms for you. So make sure that you know what they mean, and try to bring them into a conversation. Confidentiality, consent, need to know, information sharing. Caldicott Principles, privacy notice, data minimization, secure storage. I would maybe data breach here, add that one. Accessible communication, accessibility standards, something I haven't mentioned, so maybe research that one as well. Reasonable adjustment, AAC, a communication passport, handover, escalation, audit, continuous improvement, duty of care, safeguarding, professional boundaries, person-centered practice. So you use key terms naturally, then explain what they mean in your own practice. So this is just a recap of what you should know. I'm not going to go for that again. Just leave it for a bit on a screen. Just remember, do not just describe, show leadership, evidence, impact, and improvement. Challenge yourself, because I think you've spent quite a bit of time on the qualification, practicing with your assessor, with your tutor. So you deserve that distinction. So you've got that knowledge. So just go for it. Nothing bad's gonna happen. You're gonna describe things and explain things, but challenge yourself to that. What went well, what didn't go well, what would you do differently if you struggle with that analysis. Maybe that's how you can start, and then that will help you to work towards that distinction. So I hope you found it helpful, and good luck.